I used to think forgetting someone was just a choice, something you could do if you were disciplined enough. Like shelving a book you didn't plan to finish, or tossing out a shirt that didn't fit anymore. But the day I met her, I realized how naive that idea was. Because some people don't ask permission to stay with you. They just do. It was a Tuesday, gray with the kind of half-hearted drizzle that makes the street look like someone had rubbed the color out of it. I was working at the repair shop, elbow deep in the stubborn guts of a broken coffee machine, when she walked in. Not rushed, not timid, just steady. Like she already knew she'd belong in any room she entered. She carried herself with that subtle, practiced grace I've only ever seen in people who've been told no too many times in life and learned to ignore it. Her hair was tied back, strands loose around her face. A leather-bound notebook clutched under her arm. And when her eyes swept across the shop, they landed on me with a kind of frankness that made me suddenly too aware of my posture. "Do you fix more than machines here?" she asked, her voice low, edged with a dry humor I didn't know how to answer to. I wiped my hands on a rag, trying to play it cool. "Depends on what's broken." That earned the smallest smile from her, not given so much as aloud, like she was used to guarding them, only letting them slip when someone caught her off balance. She set the notebook down on the counter. The clasp was worn, the leather cracked at the corners. "The lock stuck," she said, tapping it lightly. "It isn't much, but it's mine." Her fingers lingered there for a moment, slim, confident, though her thumb kept brushing against the edge like she was reluctant to let go. I took it carefully, like it might bruise if I wasn't gentle. The metal was old, rust sitting in the grooves. Fixable, though. Everything is, if you're patient enough. While I worked, I could feel her watching me. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me feel noticed. Like I wasn't just another pair of hands behind a counter. She asked about the tools I was using, and when I stumbled over my words, explaining torque and leverage like I was back in school, she didn't laugh. She listened. That was worse, somehow. Because being listened to, really listened to, makes you want to keep talking. At one point, my grip slipped and the screwdriver clattered onto the counter. The sound filled the space between us, and for a moment neither of us spoke. She tilted her head slightly, like she was about to say something, then stopped. That pause, just a breath too long, felt louder than the clatter itself. I managed to get the lock working again. When I clicked it open, her eyes softened, almost unguarded. She took the notebook back, thumb tracing the edge where it had given way. "Thank you," she said, but there was something else under it. Something I couldn't name. And before I could think of a reply, she added, quieter, "Not everything broken should be fixed." I don't know why that line hooked itself into me, but it did. She turned to leave, notebook pressed against her chest like a shield. The bell above the door rang sharp, final. But I kept standing there, rag still in my hand, staring at the space she left behind, thinking about her words, about that pause, about the way her eyes had met mine and didn't look away. I should have gone back to work. Instead, I whispered to myself, how am I supposed to forget her now? I didn't expect to see her again. Most people who wandered into the shop came once and never thought about it afterward. But 2 days later, she returned, this time without the drizzle, without the excuse of a broken notebook. She carried a lamp base tucked under her arm, the kind of antique brass piece that belonged in a room too expensive for me to imagine. The cord dangled loose, the switch cracked. Thought maybe it deserved another chance, she said, setting it down gently. Her voice carried less humor this time. There was something heavy beneath it, as if she'd been thinking about whether or not to come here at all. I nodded, plugging the cord into the socket on my workbench. You bring me the interesting jobs. That earned a faint, distracted laugh. It wasn't the same as before. Softer, almost tired. She didn't hover this time. She stood back, arms folded, gaze drifting over the wall of tools. And for the first time, I noticed the way she held herself when no one was watching. Shoulders squared but not relaxed, hands gripping her elbows just a little too tightly. Like she needed to appear composed, but wasn't sure how long it would hold. You fix things quickly, she said after a while. I glanced up. Not always. Her eyes flicked to mine, steady for only a second before sliding away. She tapped a fingertip against her forearm, restless, and added, almost under her breath, "Wish it worked that way for people." The words landed between us, too honest, too raw. And then, like she regretted it instantly, she cleared her throat and busied herself studying the shelves again. I pretended to focus on the lamp, though my grip on the pliers had tightened. I didn't want to push, but I couldn't stop noticing the little betrayals in her body language. The way her laugh fell short, how her eyes looked like they hadn't rested in weeks, the faint tremor in her hands when she brushed hair from her face. For someone who seemed so sure of herself the first time, this felt like watching cracks appear in glass. I tested the wiring, rewound it carefully, and when the bulb finally flickered back to life, I looked over at her. She was closer now, leaning just slightly over the counter, her face caught in the golden glow of the lamp. She smiled, not guarded, not measured, just tired. And it made her look more real than anything else. "You make it seem easier than it is," she said softly. "Maybe that's the trick," I replied before I could stop myself. "Make it look easy, even when it's not." Her eyes lingered on mine for a breath too long. Something unspoken stretched in the quiet between us, taut and fragile. Then she straightened, collecting herself, the moment slipping away. She reached for the lamp, careful not to meet my gaze again. "Thank you," she murmured. But when her fingers brushed mine as she took it, neither of us moved for a second too long. That touch, accidental, ordinary to anyone else, carried the weight of something I shouldn't want. And yet, I couldn't let myself forget it. The third time wasn't an accident. She'd called ahead, asked if I stayed late sometimes, said her schedule was impossible during the day. I told her yes before I thought twice about it. That night, the shop was hushed, the rain outside steady and unrelenting, like someone drumming fingers on the roof. The kind of night where the world feels smaller, folded into itself. She came in with an umbrella dripping water at the doorway, shaking droplets from her coat before hanging it on the stand. She carried nothing to fix this time, just herself. "I didn't mean to impose," she said, brushing her damp sleeves. "You're not," I answered too quickly. My voice sounded louder than I intended, echoing in the quiet. We sat at the counter, me with a mug of stale coffee, her with nothing but her notebook again, clasp unopened. She rested her hand on it like a lockbox of things she wouldn't say out loud. I asked about her work. She said she managed projects, but didn't explain. I didn't push. I just listened, noticing how her sentences broke in the middle sometimes, how her voice dipped lower when she thought too much. There was a moment when thunder rolled, rattling the window, and she flinched, not dramatically, just a small, involuntary wince that made her look younger, almost fragile. "You don't like storms?" I asked. Her lips pressed into a thin smile. "I don't like what they remind me of." That was it. No elaboration. Just the sound of rain filling the silence after. I wanted to ask. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to guard herself here. But instead, I shifted the mug in my hands, keeping the words behind my teeth. At one point, she leaned over the counter to look at a sketch I'd been working on, an old radio schematic. Her sleeve brushed my arm, her shoulder close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, something warm, almost woody. My breath caught, and I forgot whatever explanation I'd started giving. She noticed. I know she did, because she stayed there a second too long, head tilted just slightly toward me. That was when her phone rang. The sharp sound cut through the air like glass breaking. She fumbled for it, screen glowing pale against her face. Her expression changed, almost imperceptibly, but I caught it, the tightening around her mouth, the flicker in her eyes. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the name flashing on the screen. Then, almost reluctantly, she slid it into her bag, silencing it without a word. I pretended not to notice. She pretended she hadn't been rattled. But the tension between us was louder than the storm outside. When she finally stood to leave, the rain had lightened, though the night still carried that restless energy. She reached for her coat, fingers fumbling at the buttons, and I almost lifted my hand to help. Instead, I shoved both hands into my pockets, swallowing the impulse. Because if I touched her then, I wasn't sure I'd stop. It was late again. She'd shown up just as the last customers left, coat still damp from a rain that had stopped 20 minutes earlier. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, throwing harsh shadows across the counter, across her face. She didn't smile this time. Didn't greet me with the little joke or casual warmth she usually wore like armor. She just set her bag down and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I wanted to say something. Anything. But I couldn't. The words that had hung in my throat all week suddenly felt too small, too human, too inadequate. "Do you ever feel like," she started, her voice low, hesitant, like she wasn't sure she had the right to ask? "Like we're just pretending?" I blinked. Pretending what? That we were normal? That our glances, our half-smiles, our silences were harmless? "I don't know," I admitted finally. My hands gripped the edge of the counter. "Sometimes." "Yeah." Her shoulders sagged just slightly, the tiniest fraction of relief in the slump. She looked at me then, really looked. Eyes sharp, steady, searching. "Because I can't tell if this, us, it's something or nothing," she said. Her words were so quiet, so fragile, that the room seemed to lean in to hear. And in the silence that followed, I noticed everything. The subtle tremble of her fingers as she adjusted the strap of her bag, the way the light caught a single streak of gray in her hair, the small lines around her eyes that weren't made for laughing. They were made for holding back too much. I wanted to reach for her hand. I wanted to close the space between us. But I didn't. Because touching would mean admitting something I wasn't ready to name, something we both might regret. "Maybe," I said finally, voice careful. "Maybe we don't need to know yet. Maybe it's enough to be here, like this." Her gaze dropped, just for a second, and I thought I'd missed my chance to say more. But then she exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, a soft sound that made my chest tighten. We didn't speak for the next several minutes. The only noise was the faint hum of the lights, the distant sound of a car driving past outside, rain-slicked streets glistening under street lamps. And then she whispered, so low I had to lean in, "I don't want this to end, even if I don't know what it is." The words landed like stones in the middle of the floor between us. And in that silence that followed, I realized something that scared me more than anything. I didn't want it to end either. Not the tension, not the uncertainty, not the little moments we stole from normal life. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. My chest felt hollow. And I knew, without knowing how or why, that the next time she looked at me like that, something would break. She hadn't meant for me to hear it, but the phone had slipped from her bag onto the counter, screen glowing with the caller ID she hadn't answered. I froze when I saw the name, then looked up at her. She was staring at the wall, shoulders stiff, as if she hadn't noticed yet. Maybe I should get that," she murmured, voice tight. I hesitated. The thing about moments like this is that you want to respect them, but curiosity weighs heavier than respect sometimes. She pressed the play button, and a familiar voice, soft, filled with warmth she no longer carried, spilled out of the speaker. The kind of voice that could make someone's chest ache with memory. I saw her flinch, a quick, almost imperceptible jerk. Her hands clenched around her notebook, knuckles whitening. "It's old," she said, barely audible. "From someone I shouldn't still care about." I nodded, trying to keep my tone casual. "You're allowed to care," I said, "even if it's old." She shook her head slightly, lips pressed together. "No, you don't understand. He's gone. And She paused, swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked to mine for the briefest second before darting away. I never got to say goodbye properly. I didn't know what to say. The words that might fix nothing hovered uselessly on my tongue. So I did the only thing that seemed right. I listened. She told me about the letters she never sent, the voicemails she never deleted, the little reminders of him tucked into drawers and boxes and corners of her apartment. Her voice cracked once, soft enough that I almost didn't hear it, and I caught the weight behind it. The regret, the longing, the ache of someone who survived but didn't quite move on. "I thought I was done with all that," she whispered. "I thought I could just forget." I reached out, not thinking, letting my fingers brush hers across the counter. It wasn't an attempt at more, just a grounding, a shared acknowledgement that the past doesn't vanish neatly. She didn't pull away. She let it linger. Just that small, accidental contact, and I felt something shift, not toward romance, not yet, but toward understanding, toward a deeper connection. She exhaled a long, shuddering breath, and for the first time in weeks, her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. You, you make it easier to bear, she said, quiet, almost broken. And then she looked at me, really looked, as if seeing something I hadn't earned the right to see. Her eyes glimmered in the pale light of the shop, and I felt the ground beneath me tilt slightly. Because in that look, I understood. The past was still alive, the heartbreak still raw, but she was letting me witness it. And somehow, in letting me witness it, she had let something else slip, too. A line had moved. A weight had shifted. And I didn't know if I was ready, but I couldn't turn away. We were both quiet that night. The shop nearly empty except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint scent of rain lingering on her coat. The lamp she'd brought weeks ago sat on the counter, its brass glow soft and warm, illuminating the small imperfections that made it real, like her. We hadn't spoken much. Words felt redundant. We were aware of each other in a way that didn't need explanation, a presence that carried more meaning than any conversation could. She leaned over the counter to examine a small repair I was doing, and our hands brushed. Not a spark, not fireworks, just that quiet, electric acknowledgement that we were both here, fully present, fully noticing. I didn't think I'd come back tonight, she murmured, almost to herself. I didn't look up. I'm glad you did. Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer than necessary. Then she let them drop, studying the repair instead. But something had shifted in the pause, the air itself heavier, warmer, charged with unspoken understanding. We worked side by side, simple tasks made intimate by proximity. The hum of machinery, the soft scratch of tools against metal, the occasional shared glance. All these small things carried the weight of something inevitable. At one point, she leaned forward, her forehead resting briefly against mine as she tried to steady a part one was holding. It was such a fleeting touch, so ordinary, and yet it made my chest tighten. There was no announcement, no flourish, just existence shared. You make it easier, she whispered. Not easier in a romantic sense. Easier in a breathing sense. Easier in a living sense. Easier to carry things that had felt heavy for too long. I nodded. My hand found hers again, fingers curling naturally, holding gently. No words were necessary. She didn't pull away. And for the first time, I realized that this, us, right here, right now, was all that mattered. We didn't talk about what had come before or what could come next. There was no sweeping declaration, no dramatics. Just recognition. Quiet acknowledgement that some things, when genuine, can't be resisted. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside glistening under dim streetlights. Inside, the shop felt like its own world, ours. She straightened slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and I could see the faintest smile tug at the corners of her mouth. A smile that held relief, understanding, and something that didn't need to be named yet. I exhaled, letting myself settle into the quiet, letting her presence fill the space beside me. No rush, no expectations, just the steady rhythm of being together. And in that simple, unspoken agreement, I felt the weight of every hesitation, every almost, every pause fall away. Because sometimes, love doesn't announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the press of a hand, the lean of a forehead, the decision to simply stay. And that was enough. It's strange how some moments stay with you, long after the world has moved on. I think about that night in the shop sometimes, the one where silence spoke louder than any words we could have said. I've changed since then. I notice details differently now. The way someone tilts their head when they're thinking, the way a hand lingers on a counter, the quiet weight of presence. I've learned that connection isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's measured in small gestures, in shared spaces, in the pauses between breaths. She's changed too, though I doubt she would admit it. There's a softness around her edges now, a willingness to let someone in without dismantling herself first. Not everything is easier. Life isn't, but she moves a little lighter. The burden she carried, the old heartbreak, The cautious distance. She's learning it doesn't have to define her anymore. We never labeled it. We never said the words people expect in stories like this. But that's what made it ours. The absence of fanfare made the reality of it heavier, truer. We learned that love isn't always a declaration. Sometimes, it's the decision to keep showing up, to notice, to stay present for someone, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's messy. I remember one night after all of it, the shop empty, the streets quiet, the lamp she brought casting soft shadows across the counter. We didn't touch, not really, just sat in the same space, letting the weight of what had passed settle around us. And in that quiet, I understood something I hadn't before. Love doesn't always need perfection to be enough. It lingers in glances, in a hand brushing against yours, in the understanding that no explanation is required. It thrives in moments that feel ordinary to anyone else, but monumental to the two people living them. And now, when I walk past a quiet shop, or see a notebook left open on a counter, or hear a small clatter of tools, I feel it again. That mix of tension and release, of longing and presence. That's the thing about human connection. It leaves traces, even when life keeps moving forward. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. We may drift. We may meet again. We may only carry this memory in secret corners of our hearts. But the change is permanent, subtle as it is. We've learned to exist together without breaking, to lean into vulnerability without fear, to see someone fully and allow ourselves to be seen. Sometimes I catch myself smiling, remembering how close we were, how carefully we moved around the edges of something unavoidable. And I realize that what we had, still have, in some ways, is enough. Because love, the real kind, isn't about perfection. It's about the quiet insistence of being present, of noticing, of staying. And maybe, if you've been paying attention, you've felt it too, in a glance, a pause, a touch. So tell me, when was the last time you let someone really see you?